All right. Hello, everyone. Ooh, it's very sunny out there today. The sunshine shining on my face. Okay. How is everyone today? Aha. Hopefully, everyone can hear me. Good, good. So let's get the screen shared. Now, we do have to wrap up our discussion of things before we get to the nature of mind. Um, and we were right around, let's see, I think it was slide 10. So I won't spend too much time on Heidegger, but I think perhaps given certain recent events, it's worth noting once again the sort of political views that he held, in addition to his metaphysics, which is kind of like Whitehead's, in the sense that both emphasize existence over time. So if you recall, right, Alfred North Whitehead's whole ideas about process, um, beings are sort of continually becoming, and that's somewhat similar to what's going on in Heidegger's philosophy, right? And his main work, which actually is part of a project that he never finished. It's called Being and Time. Being and Time is the first part of a project that Heidegger never finished. He focused on the question of being. What is being, capital B being? What does that mean? Well, um, Heidegger had accused philosophers of previously studying beings, but not being itself. So that's sort of what his project is concerned with. And what he has to say is kind of interesting here. Um, when we try and understand beings, this hides the being, capital B being of those beings. When we focus on individual beings and trying to understand them, we lose touch with what being is itself. So we're focused on this ontic level, not an ontological level of analysis. So Heidegger's not really concerned with what we would, with what the other philosophers we've looked at are concerned with, like substance. He's not concerned with substance. He's concerned with the fact that things are, not what things are, if that makes sense. Although he does have something to say about what kind of beings we are. Heidegger, um, Heidegger thinks that human beings are the kind of being for whom the question of being is a question. So I'll repeat that once more. We are the kind of beings, human beings, are the sort of being for whom the question of being, that is, what is capital B being, we're the kinds of beings for whom that is a question. What does ontic ontological mean? In this context, it means like if we're focused on the ontic level, we're looking at different beings themselves. So um my cat over there, this coffee cup, this table, right? We're interested in particular beings at the ontic level. At the ontological level, we're interested in being itself. What is it to be? That's what Heidegger's interested in. So we're the kind of being uh, to whom the question, what is being, matters. He called us Dasein. We have Dasein, and we are Dasein, right? Dasein is a German word that means there being or being there. We're always being in a particular time and place. So hence there being. So Dasein. That's what humans are. And Dasein is the kind of being for whom the question, what is being, is a real legitimate question. Think about it. Tables aren't concerned with it. Non-human animals aren't. At least Heidegger has no reason to think that they are. The question of being, what is capital B being, only matters to beings like us. So we are Dasein. That's what that means. We're the sort of being, as Crumley says, um, to whom being discloses or reveals itself. So the nature of being discloses itself to the human being in a way that it doesn't to other kinds of beings. And keep in mind here, whenever I say being, it's capital B being. As I said last time, being as almost like a verb. So for Heidegger, when it comes to truth, what is really the case? Unlike say the positivists, um, who we're not really covering logical positivism in this course, but unlike the positivists who thought that the truth could be expressed by true propositions that describe the world the way it really is. Even though we haven't really discussed positivism explicitly, it is there implicitly in a lot of what we've studied, right? Like, let's say if I tell you it's sunny outside, right? Is that true? Well, the way that we've talked about it is that, if the sentence, it is sunny outside, represents the way the world really is, if it really is sunny outside, then that proposition is true. That's the truth. Heidegger has a really different way of looking at what truth is. It's not about sentences that describe the world a certain way, right? Or beliefs that have content of a certain kind. Like if I believe that it is sunny, um, the content of my belief is that it is sunny, and we look outside and we can see that it is sunny. So my belief accurately represents the world. No, 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 no. That's not what truth is for Heidegger, which probably sounds a little bit weird, right? No, for Heidegger, the truth is the disclosing or what we would call the presencing of beings. So uh, it can be kind of difficult to see what's happening here. So don't worry about it if you're like, what? Um, but yeah, Heidegger makes this distinction in being and time between truth and correctness. And what the positivists might describe as truth, Heidegger describes as correctness. So, yeah, sure, I can have a correct belief. Like, I believe that it is sunny, and it really is sunny. The sun really is shining where I am right now. You can see it shine when I go here. You can see it shining on my face, right? So, there's evidence there that you can see. You can see out my window. It's quite sunny. Heidegger would say, I have a correct belief, but truth is something else. Truth is disclosed to us. The truth of being is disclosed to us because we are Dasein. We're the kinds of beings for whom these questions matter. But being can also withdraw because we always engage with the world through some kind of framework. And what I find really interesting about Heidegger is what he has to say about technology. For Heidegger, technology is our way of being in the modern age. Technology is how we, as he said, enframe the world, Gestell, which means like a bookcase, right? So um, we enframe the world in a certain way. How do we enframe it? In our sort of technological framework, we enframe the world as standing reserve. It's not, you know, it's not a forest, it's raw material, right? It's timber. Uh, land is not just a beautiful landscape, it's arable land that we can grow crops on or something, right? Or something that we can dig minerals out of. And when we enframe the world this way, certain aspects of being are kind of presented or presenced to us, and other aspects are withdrawn, right? We don't have to worry too much about this, okay? Because I'm probably not going to test you on any of this, but um, you know, it's a very interesting, very different relationship to being, Heidegger thinks, than say what the ancient Greeks had, which was kind of a poetic, I mean poetic in the sense of poiesis, bringing forth, um, different way of in framing the world for them. So, so if you're in framing the world in this sort of technological outlook, you look at the forest is now more standing reserve and less an object of beauty. It's less something you can take a walk through or write a poem about or take pictures of the animals in, and it's raw material, right? Um, so the big takeaways are that we are the sorts of beings, Dasein, who can ask questions about being, capital B, being. But we have to be aware that the way that we enframe the world can cause the presencing or the withdrawal of certain beings, certain elements of being. So, well, perhaps that's all I should say about that. There's also different modes of presentation of beings. Um, this is something else that I find really interesting. Um, well, that's an interest. That's a question. That's a question we can talk about, right? Um, did Heidegger see people itself this way? He's. I don't think he said explicitly that he does. In fact, I don't think he did, but he certainly is blind to the irony, the really sick irony of of what happened during the Holocaust, right? Where people were used as forced labor, even if the people weren't themselves standing reserves. Because here's the thing, if you read the essay concerning technology, human beings are not, and again, this is wrapped up in Heideggerian terminology, but human beings are not challenged in the same way that the forest is challenged by this enframing. But one thing that he does say in the beginning is that if human beings make the mistake of thinking that technology is just a tool, then we've already succumbed to technology. It's not a tool. It's a way of being, right? But yeah, there is a sick sort of awful irony there, and how he has all this to say about technology, but almost nothing to say on how human beings were forced into this absolutely brutal, um, sort of work, which he would say maybe discloses some aspect of being as standing reserve, um, and perhaps even the people themselves. Because let's remember the Nazis in their work camps literally enslaved people, right? There were labor camps and there were death camps. So people would be worked until they couldn't, until they died, or until they could be executed. Um, and yeah, that's the really unforgivable thing about Heidegger, right? Is that he I think I said last time he cops out so hard after the war. I would have apologized if Hitler had apologized to the German people. Well, um, I mean, hello, you were never going to get that. So I just read that as a cop out. But there are also modes of presentation of different beings. So we have ready to hand and present at hand. Um, and this is what Heidegger says is our primary sort of way of engaging with the world is actually ready to hand. Ready to hand is when we're using something like a tool. And you know, when you use a tool, like, could be any tool, not like a literal tool like a hammer, but a paintbrush, a pencil, even when you're typing at your computer, right? You use the tool as if it's a part of you, as if it's an extension of your body. It's only when the tool breaks that you start to treat it as present at hand. And that's the sort of scientific, objective way of looking at things. Um, so, you know, if I'm like, oh, this is my cell phone, look at that. It has so much RAM, et cetera, right? And I can look at its features and so forth. Um, and That's great. But that's not how I treat the phone when I'm using it, right? When I'm sending a text, when I'm scrolling the internet, it's more like an extension of myself. And that's really the way we engage with the world, is in this ready to hand sort of way, right? So Heidegger says our primary way of engaging with being isn't knowing, but literally engaging with other beings. Um, so I had this is mostly from last year when I had a little bit more time to go through all of this. But yeah, Heidegger is absolutely problematic. And this is a good time to stop and remind ourselves that, uh, I mean, well, there are some philosophers who are just bad. I don't think Heidegger's philosophy is bad. I think he actually does have some relevant things to say about our technological outlook, but that certainly doesn't excuse um, his political views and his treatment of his colleagues. Um, After all, he was a member of the Nazi Party until it ceased to exist. You know, he didn't get disillusioned and quit. Um, he was a Nazi as long as you could legally be a Nazi. Um, and he was subject to denazification committees after the war. And it was determined that he would be banned from teaching. I think for 5 years. Yeah, above 6 years because of his support for Nazism. Now, as I mentioned last time, um, his um, his mentor Edmund Husserl was Jewish. Heidegger and Husserl did have a sort of split, um, but I'm not sure the extent to which that was driven by anti-Semitism. He did have a number of notable students like Hannah Arendt and Hans-Georg Gadamer, um, and a lot of those students were Jewish. Um, but then again, you know, that's kind of like those people who say, right, I'm not racist. I have, a person of color friend, right? Um, yeah, well, Kaya, I mean, I I don't know. There were some I've heard of some writing, some letters, things like this that we're now aware of that the denazification committee wasn't aware of. Indeed, the some of his notebooks were published only a few years ago, and they do not paint a good picture of Heidegger, right? And I think if the denazification committees had known about some of this other stuff, he would never have been allowed to teach again. Yeah, Cormac, good point, right? He wasn't Werner von Braun, and that's a good point. both the Americans and the Soviets were a little selective after the war. Operation Paperclip, it's called. At least for the Americans, it was Operation Paperclip. And they recruited Nazi talent. Um, yeah, yeah, April just hates everybody. They recruited Nazi talent, and a lot of that went into the Apollo program. So, um, yeah, so was Heidegger, anti-Semitic, even though he had, I don't know, a lot of Jewish students? I mean, yeah, he was. Like, um, yeah, no, no, April, I know, I know. Don't worry. I don't think you really hate everybody. Yeah. But Heidegger, and this is the thing about hate, right? A lot of people think, hate looks like, I don't know, maybe Hitler up there, giving one of his speeches where he's yelling about the Jews, right? Um, Hate doesn't always look like that. Hate can be subtle. And sure, Heidegger had Jewish students, but there are demonstrably racist people who say who deny their racism on the basis that they're friends with like one or two persons of color. And it's like, well, you can still be a racist, right? Um, so yeah, that's kind of where I am with Heidegger. The reason why I don't refuse to cover him is because, quite frankly, a lot of the philosophers we've studied have had unsavory or problematic views. This obviously doesn't excuse Heidegger. Um, but if you look back in the history of philosophy, you will find a lot of racism, a lot of misogyny. And I think that's important to be aware of. Um, yeah. Well, that's why this is particularly, I think, relevant today. Um, April, go ahead.
Do you think that if the philosophers then were now, that they would have different views and that it would affect their philosophy at hand? Because I know that a lot of minds are obviously built and framed around their time frame, right? What's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what is proper, what's not proper.
Yeah.
So as times change, right, philosophy does change as well. But do you think those great minds would have a different way of presenting it, or do you think things would change for them totally?
It's hard to say, because, if I mean, if Aristotle was born today, would he even have been Aristotle? You know, I don't think it's a question that I can answer. Certainly times and places do affect our views. Um, the context we grow up in uh, can affect um, can affect uh, what we believe, right? But as far as these sort of counterfactuals, like would I don't know, would Heidegger have been an anti-Semite if he was born in the 20th century, like late 20th century? I don't know. Um, but yeah, like people in the chat are saying, yeah, a lot of philosophers. I think John Locke was one of these who defended the indigenous people or the genocide of the indigenous people. And a lot of this was owing to what he had to say about property and property rights. Um, Aristotle gave justification for why you should be able to own slaves, right? Um, um, Trying to think of some other ones. Kant was early Kant was yeah, pretty racist and homophobic. Um, and then even the philosophers that you do want to say, oh, look at this, this was interesting, like Plato. Plato was homosexual, right? Plato never married. Plato had a lot of male lovers. Um, so you think, okay, that's pretty cool. But he also thought, the Greeks were more rational than everyone else. Not that it wasn't quite racism, but it was sort of like I guess because just because the Greeks didn't really have a concept of race, but jingoism, I guess maybe. Um, yeah, so it's harder to find. It's definitely harder to find philosophers who were um, good through and through, even today. Well, not it's not that hard today. I mean, we've got a lot of really great ones at Carleton. But you still hear stories of, John Searle, who we'll cover soon, is one that comes up a lot. I mean, John Searle is a very famous philosopher of mind. We've got to talk about his Chinese room experiment in this unit, but he lost his tenure because he was, um, essentially what they call what the kids call a sex pest with his graduate students. So like, look, philosophers are human beings. You're going to get good ones and you're going to get evil ones. Um, and that's one of the reasons why I think it's interesting to, to not forget about Heidegger, to not forget about thinkers like that. It's not because we're like trying to encourage you to believe in the things that he did, but we might still be able to learn how not to be from individuals like that. And I think that's especially important today when a lot of um, a lot of people are teaching other people how to be in particularly like they're teaching them how to be particularly bad, right? I'm thinking of the right-wing influencers in the manosphere, uh, uh, those kinds of individuals. Anyway, why don't I get a little bit more coffee? And then we can start talking about the nature of mind. Okay, so think about all the things that make up your mental life. You've got more or less mental things. Um, well, they're all mental things, but more, I don't know, thinky things, like beliefs and desires and propositional attitudes like that. But also, maybe what we would call affective things, things that are less cognitive and more affective in the sense that they are things we feel, states that we feel, bodily states that we experience, like pain, hunger, pleasure, um, or emotions, right? Our emotions are a part of our mental life, even though emotions, maybe we think of emotions as feelings, not all feelings are emotions, right? We have pains, pleasures, um, we have moods which differ from emotions. I was talking about this in another class just the other day, but we all experience them, right? So we have these experiences of our body and we have these mental states like beliefs and desires and hopes and fears, all of that is part of our mental life. And a lot of us, I think, have the intuition that these mental things are very, very different kinds of things from physical things, right? And this kind of implies a sort of dualism, which we've touched on before, right? Rene Descartes was a dualist, for example. Plato was a dualist. Um, So somebody's got to jump in and help me out here. Um, how much have I told you about propositional attitudes? I feel like I've mentioned them here and there, but I cannot recall if I've covered them explicitly. Well, maybe I better make sure just to cover them explicitly, just in case. We've talked about what propositions are, right? Sentences about the world that can have a truth value. Oh, we did. Okay, good. Well, I'll go through it quickly then. Just remember that, yeah, I'll cover them. That propositions, so remember that propositions are sentences about the world. We were just talking about them with Heidegger on truth versus correctness, right? So a proposition is a statement about the world. It can take on a truth value. So the sentence, "It is sunny," is a proposition. It describes something about the world, and it might be true or it might not be. I can see that it is in fact sunny. I'll open, see, look at this. Oh wow, look at all this light. Ah, so bright. So it is sunny. So it's a true proposition. And then if I adopt some kind of attitude toward the content of that proposition, that is what the sentence is about, then I have a propositional attitude. So if I believe that it is sunny, my propositional attitude is belief, and the content of that belief is the same as the content of the sentence. I believe that it is sunny. And usually propositions feature these that clauses. So sometimes we call them that clauses, right? I believe that it is sunny. I believe that it is snowing, etc. These are propositional attitudes, and they these differ from other features of our mental lives, like pain, right? Pain is not propositional. It just hurts and you feel it, right? Regardless, each of these are part of our mental life. So as I said, um, the ordinary happenings in our world seem quite different from mental events or mental states. Like, I don't know, a rock rolling down the hill is, well, first of all, the rock is very different from me, and its rolling down the hill is different than the sorts of processes that unfold within my mind. There's nothing that it's like, so far as we know, to be the rock. Um, and it's rolling down the hill purely as a consequence of physical forces that are acting on it, like gravity, right? I seem to be different from that. I'm not just subject to gravity. I am. Obviously I can't, go hover over to the kitchen over there if I want to. But I can initiate actions in a way that the rock can't, right? I can decide, oh, it's time for a sip of coffee, and I can pick up my coffee mug and have a sip, right? Rocks can't do that. Rocks can't feel, can't think, can't act, right? But I can. So it seems on the face of it that the mental is quite different from the physical. And dualism is a theory that says that the mental and the physical are two fundamentally different oh my goodness. Two fundamentally different kinds of stuff or substance. Not everyone agrees with that though. Physicalism, for example, which is a type of substance monism, says that there's only physical stuff, matter, energy, forces like force fields, um, atoms, molecules, electromagnetic fields. These are the things that exist. We used to actually call physicalism materialism. Like if you go crack open, uh, you know, books on early modern philosophy, people that cover Descartes, Hobbes, those thinkers, they talk about materialism, um, because this is when the sort of clockwork view of the clockwork universe view came into the picture. Actually, what Heidegger, not to go on about Heidegger too much often, but his whole idea that our modern way of framing the world, um, our technological way of framing the world really started with the scientific revolution, not the industrial revolution like you might expect. No, it was the scientific revolution, and that was when thinkers began to treat the world as matter in motion, and it was subject to the laws of nature, which were discovered by Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, Newton, right? All of those scientific revolution figures. Um, so because of the emphasis on matter in motion, there's um there's a tradition of calling this view materialism. Um, it's not materialism like Crumley mentions this. It's not materialism like, if you're a very materialistic person and you need to buy the best clothes and the latest gadgets and the best car and the best house, right? It's not like a consumerist materialism. It's a metaphysical materialism. But we don't really call it materialism anymore because, um, well, these thinkers didn't understand things like magnetic fields or electric fields. Uh, they were still in the process of working out concepts like energy and force, right? And these are all physical things. They're not made of matter, but they exist. So that's why now I follow a number of other thinkers in referring to this as physicalism, not materialism. So if you are looking at the world, you might start to think that there are a couple of different sets of characteristics which define the physical. There's what our senses tell us, and there's what science finds, right? Our senses could tell us, the kinds of things that John Locke called, they can tell us about what John Locke called secondary properties, but those properties don't resemble the qualities of the objects themselves, right? Primary qualities do. So our senses could tell us about the solidity of an object, and our idea of solidity matches the quality of solidity that the object has, more or less. But the color of the object that we perceive doesn't necessarily, right? Um, so really think of science, if you're a physicalist, science is like supposed to be an extension of our senses. We use scientific instruments that can detect things that we can't detect with our senses. And we can use other scientific instruments to look at what's going on very, very small scales or very, very large scales, right? We have electron microscopes that can see very, very small things. And we have telescopes that can show us very, very big things like, stars and galaxies and so forth. Things that we can't see with the naked eye, right? So you're probably thinking, wow, this sounds very empiricist. Well, it is, right? Um, not all not all of the figures in the scientific revolution were empiricists, but some were. The notable exception is Descartes, a rationalist, right? So that's physicalism. But doesn't it now seem that um, those aspects of your mental life that we've been talking about are really, really different um, from physical objects? Like the rock, how I'm different from the rock rolling down the hill, right? Here's an example. Um, I can give you a description of how vision works, like a physical description. Light of various wavelengths enters my eye through the pupil and is projected onto my retina. And on my retina, I have rods and cones. These are little cells that fire when light shines on them, right? So those rods and cones fire and send signals down my optic tract, down into the optic nerves. Hmm. These signals eventually reach my occipital cortex, which is on the, for lack of a better term, the back. It's on the back of the brain. Um, there, a whole bunch of complicated stuff happens, which I'm not going to go into in detail now, but neurons fire in particular ways. And all of a sudden, I have a visual representation of the thing I'm looking at, in this case, this coffee cup. But my conscious visual experience of the coffee cup seems like a different kind of thing than the coffee cup itself. So that's where dualism enters the picture. Is there more to the mind than just the physical? Today, I want to talk about a couple of kinds of dualism: substance dualism and property dualism. So, who's following? Who thinks, or to whom does it seem that mental events and mental items, mental states are very, very different in kind and in term very, very different in terms of their nature from physical events, objects, and states? Who has that? Who shares that intuition? Like this coffee cup is some, oh, and notably, let's use the coffee in the cup. It's just a collection of particular kinds of molecules that are made from applying hot water to the ground up bits of roasted coffee beans, right? And I can give a physical description of coffee beans and the coffee. It's got some water, it's got caffeine, it's got uh, I mean, it's probably got some tannins. I don't know. I'm not a chemist, right? I'm not a food scientist, but I could give a complete physical description of the coffee. I could like list out all of the chemicals that make up the coffee, right? But none of that captures how coffee tastes or smells, right? That's the sense in which I mean our mental life seems very different from the physical. So who shares that intuition? We can get some discussion going. While we do that, I'm just going to top up. I haven't completely demolished this coffee just yet. I just like to keep it full because it gets cold faster. So yeah, Quinn agrees they're different. Sarah does. Keep letting me know and I'll warm this coffee up. Good to keep your coffee close. All right. Yeah, so a lot of you say, yeah, it seems like, there's a really big difference between the objective, the coffee, as we can understand. Oh, excuse me, objectively. Um, yeah, like Remy says, physicalism might not be able to explain the what. In this case, I would say the what it's like to experience the taste and aroma of coffee. So these things seem quite different. um, mental items and physical items. Does that mean that the world is made up of two different kinds of stuff, physical stuff and mental stuff? Maybe that's what a dualist would say. A dualist would say that mental things are non-physical. They're non-physical. Yeah. Yeah, you don't have to agree. Of course, like Cormac disagrees, and that's fine. You can be a physicalist. I'm a physicalist, right? I'm not a dualist. Well, if I am a dualist, I'm a property dualist, which is not the same thing as substance dualism, which is what we're talking about. Which is what we're talking about here. Um, so, um, so the world is non-physical, or the mental is non-physical. So we have physical substance and mental substance. What's the motivation for this claim? Well, a couple of things. Mental states, as we've seen, have content, right? Those propositional attitudes I mentioned earlier have content. They're about things. And remember, we call this intentionality. And mental states also have maybe what we could call feeling. I don't like that term. Um, but there are felt qualities of experience, the raw feels, as Crumley puts it. These felt qualities of our experiences are called qualia or quale, singular. This we've used the term phenomenal and phenomenology in various ways, but when you hear the term phenomenology in this context, it refers to the what it's like, right? What is it like? There's something that it's like to smell the aroma of coffee. Oh, that's good stuff. There's something that's like that's different from what it's like to taste spaghetti, right? Um, and that's different from what it's like to behold a beautiful sunset, or to feel the chill of a cold winter morning. You know, these felt qualities are all qualia. So, dualists say that, look, in order to explain intentionality and phenomenology, we have to look beyond the physical. The physical won't do it. And this is demonstrated by a thought experiment called Mary's Room, or uh, sometimes Mary the color scientist, or what Mary didn't know, right? But it's Mary, let's just say Mary the color scientist. So let's try and go through this real quick. This, by the way, is due to Frank Jackson, who's pictured here, an Australian philosopher. Um, he says, everyone, let's imagine Mary, who has complete physical knowledge of color, every physical fact there is to know about color. So Mary knows all about different wavelengths of light, how they impinge upon the retina, um, how this causes various kinds of activity in the visual cortex, everything. Every physical fact you could possibly think of that has anything to do with color or color vision or the neuroscience of color, Mary knows because she lives in the future where knowledge of this stuff is complete. But here's the catch. Mary has never seen any color. Mary lives in a special room where everything is black and white. Now, one day, we let Mary go outside. Here's the question. When she sees color for the first time, will she be surprised? Or will she say, oh, I knew that that's what, I don't know, red would look like? What do we think? I don't know about the blue shade theory, Kaya. I'm not familiar with that one.
It's basically that We haven't ever seen every shade of blue, but when we do see a new one, we know that it is blue.
Oh, interesting. Well, that's certainly related to how we categorize color, right? And this is actually interesting because uh, the way we categorize color can depend on not just quirks about our visual system, but also about the language we speak or the color we or the culture we grow up in. Um, I guess it's related in that sense, but it's asking something more fundamental. What this is asking about is whether there are more facts to the world than just physical facts, right? So this is part of the knowledge argument against physicalism, which I will explain in a moment. Now, Quinn thinks that Mary would be surprised because, yeah, like you say, colors feel like something you have to experience rather than just theorize, right? Yeah, fair. Okay. Remember, this is a thought experiment, so there's no correct answer. What this experiment is supposed to do is get us thinking so that we can figure out whether we think there is more than just the physical. Do we believe there are other kinds of facts beyond physical facts? Because Mary knows all the physical facts, right? She knows what wavelengths of light will produce what color. She knows how the visual system works, right? Um, so the question is, with her complete physical knowledge of the neurophysiology of color and the physics of color and everything else you could ever possibly want to know about color, would she be surprised when she steps out of the room and sees color for the first time? Well, that's a good question, Remy, and we'll get to that. But I want to hear your intuitions. Will Mary be surprised or not? People are hesitant to answer. That's okay. A lot of people think she'll. Okay, so the people who are speaking in the chat think, yes, seems like she'll be surprised. So here's what that means, right? If you think that Mary, yeah, okay, well, that's a good point as well, April, and I'll get to that, right? If you think that Mary will be surprised, that means there's something about color that Mary didn't know. But Mary knows all of the physical facts. So that means there must be non-physical facts about color and color perception, which means physicalism is false. That's why this is called the knowledge argument against physicalism. It's an argument against physicalism that depends on the possibility of knowledge of facts other than just physical facts. Yeah, but like April said, some people would deny that Mary learned a new fact. Maybe she comes to see an old fact from a new perspective. So before, she had a lot of propositional knowledge about color. And when she steps out of the room and sees color for the first time, now she has a sort of know how and not a know. She has a knowing how rather than a knowing that, right? Um, yeah, maybe about pain, Quinn. Um, yeah, Isaiah's doesn't think that maybe doesn't think she'll be surprised, and that's fair. I don't know, Kai. I think it probably depends. It might depend on the cause of the blindness. Um, I can't really speak on those cases, but I can speak on a very interesting case of a gentleman who was colorblind, but he also had synesthesia. so that's that kind of cross wiring of the senses where I don't know, one example that's fairly common is that words, letters, or numbers have colors. Um, and so this synesthete experienced colored synesthesia. He experienced colors via his synesthesia that he couldn't actually see out in the world. He called them his Martian colors. So that's one case I can comment on. Um, um, Yeah, but it's in the far future, so we've made this room such that if Mary looks at her hands, it's like she's existing in grayscale. It's like a grayscale room. So that's what we've done. So she's never seen color. Um, yeah, modded eyes, yeah. Um, so Remy, yeah, experiencing color is primary. Well, yeah, but we can bracket all of that for the purposes of the thought experiment, right? Um, like you said earlier, though, Remy, like maybe, maybe she's just, maybe she knows, uh, like propositionally a lot about color, but doesn't know what it's like. So again, like I was saying with April's comment, like maybe Mary doesn't learn a new fact, but gains a new perspective on a fact she already knows when she experiences color, right? But anyway, the takeaway from this argument is the following. If you think that Mary will be surprised, that means you believe there are more facts than just physical facts, which implies dualism. If you deny that Mary will be surprised, then you probably think that there are just physical facts. And if we allow Mary to know, if we really allow her to know all of the physical facts, then Mary wouldn't be surprised, right? It's like Daniel Dennett says, like, we let Mary out of the room, we give her a trick banana. The banana is actually green, not yellow. So we say, "Hey Mary, here's a banana." And she goes, "Oh, bananas are supposed to be yellow, but that one's not." And so we failed to fool her. So if you think Mary will be surprised when she steps out of the room, do you also think we could fool her with the trick banana? Right? So think about it. Anyway, April, go ahead, please.
With dual with dualism, so I feel like with having physical senses, like physical and mental, they both kind of work together though, right? Like when you're tasting something, it's not just there's that physical sensation that goes through, but it's also the connection of the mind to put it all together.
Yeah, like different people are going to have different intuitions about this.
Yeah.
I'm a physicalist, so I think there's some explanation. And again, this is maybe more of a property dualism sort of thing, but like maybe there are physical properties and mental properties, and the mental properties supervene on physical properties. So, um, that's one way to look at it. But what a physicalist would say is like, the taste of coffee is due to um the molecules in the coffee, what the coffee's made of, and how those cause your neurons to fire. They would say that that's it. Whereas a dualist would say, but something seems to be missing, right? How does all this talk of molecules and neurons firing result in that subjective experience of the taste of coffee, right? So, just flip back to the chat. Yeah, bananas. So okay, so by the way, I don't want to try and convince you either way. I think that some variety of physicalism is um I think some variety of physicalism is probably correct. That's my opinion. But I recognize also that that substance dualism, for example, is represented in a lot of the world's religions, for example. So it's something that we're going to be pretty familiar with, and probably even if we deny that we're substance dualists, there are still sort of dualist ways of talking about the mind and body that sort of sneak back in. So yeah, there's that. Anyway, so we've got substance dualism, which says there are two kinds of substances. There's mental substance and physical substance. This is the sort of dualism that Rene Descartes famously advocated for. And then there's property dualism, which is actually kind of a substance monism, a kind of physicalism that says that there's only one kind of substance, physical substance. But non-physical, excuse me, non-physical mental properties can emerge from particular arrangements of matter and particular sorts of activity going on within that matter, like brains. So, um, and there's a whole bunch of different ways to sort of cash this out, right? Like supervenience is one, emergence is another. Um, but let's look at substance dualism first. So, minds, if you're a substance dualist, minds are mental object, along with everything else that minds do. Um, Conscious experiences, memories, perceptions, thoughts, beliefs, desires, etc., feelings, these are all mental objects. And the mind and everything in it has no physical properties. And of course, Descartes is probably the best example of this. In his book, The Meditations, he argued that bodies are made of res extensa, or extended substance, substance that has mass, takes up space, etc. Minds are made of res cogitans, thinking substance, non-physical, non-extended, and it thinks, whereas matter is extended, has mass, and doesn't think. How do we come to know about our minds? Well, we introspect, right? We sort of look inward. I look inward and I can, I can tell that I have lots of different thoughts, feelings, experiences, and I might ask myself what makes those mine and not someone else's. What makes them mine is the fact that they're occurring to me. I am a subject to whom I'm a subject who has these thoughts, right? In the words of Descartes, I am a thinking thing, right? I am a thing that thinks. That's my fundamental nature. A thing that affirms, doubts, etc. My belief that, for example, Ottawa is the capital city of Canada has the same content as your belief that Ottawa is the capital city of Canada. But what makes the belief mine and your belief yours is the fact that it's two different subjects holding the belief. I'm holding my belief and you're holding yours, right? So, any questions about substance dualism? We've kind of talked about substance dualism here and there quite a lot because we did start out with Descartes, and I'm sure I've been mentioning. Uh, oh, excuse me. I'm sure I've been mentioning in passing that Descartes is a substance dualist. So, any questions? Just to make sure that we're all good before we proceed. Okay. Well, what about property dualism? Property dualism is a bit different from substance dualism. Property dualism is a type of physicalism. So remember, on physicalism, only physical stuff exists. But if the matter is arranged in the right way, we can have mental properties in addition to physical properties. And again, there's a lot of ways to understand this, but a big one is to say that mental properties supervene on physical properties. Um, but that implies a sort of epiphenomenalism. Um, we'll get to that later. An interesting thing is that both substance and property dualists would deny that we can reduce the mental to the physical. Um, like the mental, even if you're a property dualist, the mental is still something more than just the physical. You can't just reduce it to the physical. Um, but it's not because the mental, because mental things are of a different substance. It's because um, they comprise a different set of properties than physical properties. Huh, interesting, Sarah. Yeah. Um, explain which particular thing more? I think Kaya was asking for me to explain something more. Which particular thing would you like to hear more about? Oh, sorry, epiphenomenalism. Yeah, we will get to epiphenomenalism. But basically, epiphenomenalism is the idea that, okay, so there are mental states, mental properties. They're a separate bunch of properties from physical properties, and mental items are different from physical items. Um, but what epiphenomenalism implies is that physical events can cause mental events. So, light can strike my retina and stimulate my optic nerves and eventually cause a visual experience. But mental events cannot affect physical events. So mental events are all effect, no cause. So I have, I don't know, a desire to reach out and pick up my coffee cup and have a sip of coffee. An epiphenomenalist would say, well, it's not really your desire that initiated that action. It's just brain activity. And your desire for more coffee just supervenes on, some kind of neural activity, right? We'll get into this more as we move throughout this unit, but um, so why should we be dualists? Well, let's think of substance dualism first. Um, it seems like I have free will. I mean, certainly it seems to me that when I say to myself, "Oh boy, I'd sure like a sip of coffee," I make the decision. I am the author of this action, picking up the cup and having a sip, right? But um, that's not all. As I said earlier, um, dualism is present. Substance dualism is present in a lot of the world's religions, and a lot of those religions um, have the idea that you, whatever you are, ultimately a soul or a spirit, say, survives death and maybe goes to some kind of afterlife, right? Mm. So if something is able to survive the death of the body, it must be non-physical. So the soul must be non-physical. And this goes all the way back to Plato, right? This is not to say necessarily that a physicalist um, would deny that the mind can survive death, right? Maybe some physicalists would find it plausible to upload your mind to a computer. Say, what if I copied your brain and made like a digital version of your brain so that you existed in a computer? And then your body died. Well, that's kind of like surviving the death of the body, but that's a very different sort of thing than what dualists mean when they say that the mind survives the death of the body. They mean that it survives because it's not because the mind is ultimately non-physical, because it's a thinking thing. Nonetheless, like if you are a subscriber to, I don't know, say for example, one of the Abrahamic religions, and you believe that the soul survives the death of the body and goes to an afterlife, I mean, you're almost certainly a dualist. You believe that the soul, the part of you that thinks and feels and has free will and morality, is not a physical thing. So the body is physical, it can die. The soul is not physical, it does not die. It's eternal. Not exactly, no. That's a good question, but yeah. Um, Descartes would like substance as substratum is that sort of mysterious, we don't know what it is that holds the properties together. But for Descartes, the soul is thinking substance. So we can actually say something about what this substance is like. We can say, well, it has certain essential features, like that it thinks, whereas Locke would deny that. Um, okay, so the other thing about physicalism is that it implies determinism. It implies a determined universe. Um, things happen because they were caused. Physical events happen because of a physical cause, and those prior causes were caused by another prior cause, et cetera, all the way back, right? Kind of like the universe is just like a billiard table, right? And if a cue stick strikes the cue ball, which strikes the eight ball, which rolls into the corner pocket, it's all caused. Um, it's all determined. It's all matter in motion, right? But we seem, emphasis on seem, to have freedom of the will. So maybe the non-physical mind explains freedom of the will, if indeed we have it. Now, a physicalist could reply by saying, yeah, okay, so maybe there's physical laws, but maybe there's also mental laws that govern mental states and how they're related to one another. Maybe the mind is something like a computer. Um, and so there are mental states which can cause or be caused by other mental states. Um, and ultimately these mental states just supervene on physical states. Like, the mind might be like that. Or you can just be you could just be a determinist. We'll talk about this more when we talk about freedom of the will. Um, but there are a number of different metaphysical positions we can take on this. All right, let's just try and finish this slide and then we'll call it quits for today. So we could say like, oh, we need mental substance. If we're arguing for dualism, we need the mental substance to explain freedom of the will and life after death. Sure, but more importantly, for many contemporary dualists, um, we need dualism. Well, or rather, we can argue for dualism on the basis of introspection and conceivability, right? Um, the introspection argument says that similar to how our senses tell us about the physical world, introspection tells us about our mental world. And physical descriptions don't really do much for us when it comes to describing the mental. I mean, I could give you a physical description of how neurons fire in particular parts of the brain, and indeed, that's what neuroscientists do, right? They might scan your brain while you're doing some cognitive task. Um, and say like, oh, well, your neurons in your frontal cortex are really firing a lot. Um, okay, but what does that mean, right? Does that tell me anything about why coffee tastes like coffee and not like something else? Or why blue looks blue and not some other color? Not really, dualists would say. But I can introspect. Um, and maybe learn something about my mental life that way. Leibniz proposed a really interesting thought experiment, which is not really discussed in too much detail in the book. But he had us imagine that the brain and the nervous system were like a giant mill with lots of wheels and gears and ropes. Just imagine like a big giant mill, like a windmill, but much larger. So imagine you could shrink yourself very small and walk around the brain as if you were taking a tour of a big giant mill. You just like in the mill, you'd see wheels turning. I don't know what they're milling. Maybe they're grinding up some flour, maybe they're cutting wood. I don't know, but you could see all of the parts pushing and pulling and interacting with one another. If you were shrunk down and placed in the brain, you'd see all of the physical parts doing their thing, the neurons firing, the neurotransmitters flowing between synapses and so on. But you wouldn't see mental things. You would only see the physical stuff, as if you were walking around a giant mill. And the idea is supposed to be that when we introspect, we realize that the mind has to be non-physical. Like if you could shrink yourself down and explore the brain, um, you wouldn't find redness or the smell of coffee or the feel of a cold winter morning anywhere in there. You'd just find physical stuff affecting other physical stuff. You wouldn't find anything mental. That's what this is meant to show. And that's what I meant earlier, right? Like if I take a scan of your brain and I say, oh, your neurons are firing in such and such a way, Leibniz might say, and by the way, Leibniz is not a dualist. So let's be clear, but Leibniz is actually a substance monist. But his introspection argument, I think, is helpful here. Uh, if I scan your brain and say, look at how all your neurons are firing, you're going to say, but what is it about all of that explains why subjective experience is the way it is, right? Why are these neurons firing? Why are those related to, the quale of the cup of coffee that I'm enjoying? How do they explain that, right? That's what a dualist would say. Although, yeah, asterisk, Leibniz isn't a dualist, but his introspection argument is used to show uh, that the physical story is not the whole story. We better call it quits for the day. So, are there any questions? Oh, good question. Yeah, Alphonse Elric. Yeah, like from Full Metal Alchemist, the soul being bound to the suit of armor. Yeah, yeah. In fact, the metaphysics of Full Metal Alchemist are incredibly dualist, right? The way they talk of bodies and souls and how Alphonse loses his body, so Ed attaches his soul to a new body. Yeah, that is so dualist. That is very dualist. Yeah, it is good. I think FMA Brotherhood is my all-time favorite, actually. If you like gun to my head, favorite anime, it's probably Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. Um even though I'm not a duelist, I really like that. I really like it. Oh, too many. I can't watch One Piece. It'll take too long. There's like 5 million episodes. I'll never see it all. I mean, maybe I can give it a try, but um I just don't have that kind of time on my hands. Yeah, maybe. Maybe. I might give it a try. There's so many episodes. It's so daunting. I like a story that begins and ends. Um, I don't even know Slam Dunk. Oh, if they're reanimating it, maybe, yeah. Okay. Kind of like a Dragon Ball Kai situation where they cut out all the filler. Yeah, there should be more sports anime. There's anime about everything though. That's the cool part. Um, but yeah, dualism. Dualism is there in Full Metal Alchemist and in many other stories too. I mean, even there's certainly dualism in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, just for example. Like Thanos snaps you out of existence, but you still exist and you can be brought back and put back together. Like, okay, there's souls apparently. There's a soul stone that you can control souls with. Sounds pretty dualist to me, right? Oh, really? No, that's what I would watch as a chess anime. I haven't seen Soul Eater, but yeah, people who are weapons, or just the idea of weapons having souls. Like this is an old idea from like mythology. Like here's this magic sword. Careful, the sword is alive. So that's also a kind of dualism. So, anywho, this is really great, but I should get going. I have to get up to the campus to teach another class. No, interesting. Uniform has a soul. Um, well, what I'm recommending for the essay, Michael, is that you just submit drafts. Give me a couple of drafts. So give me like an early draft, a middle draft, and then the final draft that you want me to grade. And just save a draft at different stages of putting your essays together. And then you could submit all of those in the essay Dropbox. Yeah. So just do that. That's the simplest way. All right. So I'll see you all next time, and we will continue our discussion of dualism, and then hopefully we'll get to our discussion of physicalism. All right. Have a good rest of your day, everyone. I'll see you on Thursday. Bye for now.